All right, sometimes in life, things aren't going the way we want them to go. Sometimes we're depressed, we're grieving over certain issues, our heart is heavy, we have a fog over our mind and our spirit, and things aren't just the way we want them to be. So if you find yourself in a place like that, and I've been there before, what you need to do is you need to rebuild. Okay, you need to rebuild your walls, rebuild the spiritual walls of your life. All right, now listen, Nehemiah, in the book of Nehemiah, this gentleman, the Jews were in captivity from the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, Nehemiah was like a cupbearer, right? He was like an assistant to the king Artaxerxes. Now, one day, while in the palace, he had got word from one of his countrymen that the walls of Jerusalem, his home city, were still in disrepair, right? And they were broken down, and it just depressed him. It made him so sad. Many of his people had gone back in a couple of different returns to Jerusalem, and it was approaching the time where another third return to Jerusalem was about to take place, with a lot of their people leaving Medo-Persia and going back to Jerusalem. But he got word that things were not in a good place, and he was sad. I mean, his spirit was so downtrodden. Now, when he was in the palace, King Artaxerxes had noticed this, and he asked him why he was sad. Why was his countenance, so down? Now, Nehemiah was kind of scared initially, because listen, you don't come into the presence of the king with a sad countenance, like as if you're mourning in sackcloth. I mean, you could be killed for such a thing. But he told the king the reason why he was sad, because of his home city and the walls being broken down. And so the king was sensitive to his servant's heart, and he asked him what he could do for him. Wow, get that. The king asked Nehemiah what he can do. So what did Nehemiah do? He first prayed. He prayed to God. After praying, then he basically told the king Artaxerxes, he asked him if he could have permission to go back to Jerusalem and to rebuild the walls. And what do you know? The king gave him permission. And on top of that, the king just didn't give him permission. He actually gave him resources. He gave him resources to rebuild. He gave him letters. Okay, he gave him authority to purchase timber and what have you, so he can make everything right in the city of Jerusalem as far as rebuilding. And he sent him on his way with captains of his army and horsemen. Wonderful. It's almost a miracle to get that sort of favor from the king. Now, when Nehemiah did take the journey, about 3 months journey from the Medo-Persian Empire to Jerusalem, when he got there, he didn't tell anybody, which is pretty smart. Sometimes when there's an issue in your life and you have God's favor and you're moving and you're fulfilling God's will, sometimes you want to keep those things to yourself quietly, and you assess the situation with wisdom. Now, after he got the lowdown of what was going on in Jerusalem, he got the lay of the land, he saw what was going on, and that's when he approached all the peoples of Jerusalem to encourage them to actually recruit and to organize families to then start to rebuild the walls. Now listen, they start to rebuild the walls, but like most times when you have issues in your life, or you're trying to rebuild and you're trying to get back to a place of spiritual soundness, the enemy will come against you, right? So it was no different with Nehemiah. He had this guy named Tobias and several others who were against him. And they were Samaritans, they were officials, rulers of that area. So it's understandable that they were a bit jealous and confrontational about the Jews coming back to this area, because that was going to basically, nullify their authority. So here's the point. If you're in a place and you're sad and you're grieved over a certain situation, your heart is heavy, You need to rebuild the spiritual walls in your life, for real. Now, how do you do that? Number one, seek God. Seek God. Ask him for help. Humble yourself. Fast. This is what Nehemiah did. He humbled himself. He fasted. He prayed. Okay? Fast and pray. Take some time and seek the Lord, and then begin to rebuild your life, your mind, the way you think. Okay? And you need to get into the Word of God. There's no doubt you need to be reading the Word of God. That will help establish and build a firm foundation for the walls of your spiritual life.